Hello, this is Patrick from Ground to Dust, doing a new song breakdown from our track Formations off of the album Shift. I have here the earliest version of it. I believe this was the first demo written for the album, even while I was still mixing and mastering the previous album, Chronophobia. For context, let's hear some of the final version of the track from the album. Now, one of the things that I like about that is that pretty much everything you heard there in the final version was present in the initial draft. We added more throughout the length of the track, but the basic elements remain consistent. First, there is this just sort of deep dark pad. This is using Farlight, which does granular synthesis on vocal samples. It's a contact library. And that, at least in this initial version, just sort of underpins the entire track. And we've got a bass line that comes in. So that is an ostinato, just pulsating endlessly. But there is you see here, a 5.6% chance that it will jump either one octave or two. So just as it's going, just chugging along, every so often it'll bump up one octave. And then on top of that, we have a very slow 0.06 hertz LFO that is mapping to the cutoff frequency of the patch and cloud supply library. So our little cutoff knob here is turning up and down slowly while this slightly randomized ostinato plays. But then during a breakdown here, you'll see the curve on the randomness goes from 5% up to 71%, so it's jumping more frequently. And then when the rest of the track sort of comes back in, it goes back down. And then finally, we're running this through a phaser, stereo spread, slow movement, high mix. My phasers and flangers and such, I like to add some stereo, some motion, but not a lot of feedback or like The actual sound quality flangers and phasers add, I don't necessarily care for, but I do like the motion in the spread, so I tend to use very slow and wide settings that don't color the sound but do spread the sound around. So then one of the important elements going on here is the percussion that plays. So this is playing through Reactor, through the new school instrument, although now it's fairly old, and this uses a crazy sequencing format. Okay, I don't even know where to start in explaining how this sequencer works. It is a series of grid points with blocks spread on them that, as the steps go, and in this case it's 32 steps of 16th notes, they interact with each other and turn each other on and off, which in turn on and off individual instrument channels with unique settings. And then there is a random, or not a random, an LFO on those settings. So this here is the initial sequence, and then as they go through the steps and influence each other, this is the sequence as it plays out. And then these are the motion of the settings. And that's all I really understand about it, but it is kind of cool. So I do have a slight LFO on the volume that is as you see, it starts high and then it goes low and then it starts high and goes low, and it's set at an 8 bar rate. So every 8 bars, the percussion starts kind of loud and then gets softer and softer and softer, and then it comes back in again. The pre-fader is just for the ramp up at the beginning, so that volume isn't on my mixer fader. So let's hear that loop without post-processing. See, it gets quieter there, and then it'll come back in. So the first layer we have in there is Freak, which is it's a ring mod, amp mod, and frequency mod. I'm using as frequency mod. It's just adding some color and stuff. It's not too important. But then I'm throwing in molecular, which is a multi-effect, modular multi-effect processor. And so this is adding a lot of weird delays and weird reverbs and stuff. And, buffering and things a bit. And then finally, Realm for some reverb. So that plays throughout the track, although in the breakdown section it does turn off again. Now that sound generator is sort of an always on thing. You can't really sequence to it. You can just sort of mute it when you don't need it. which is how we handled it here in this earliest version. And then the final piece for this initial demo is the randomized synth. Now, on the previous video, I did go through my randomized synth chain of single held notes that are then going through an arpeggiator and a randomized pitch generator and, adding another unison note above it here, just like a single octave above, and then constraining it to a scale. So it is, yeah, that's a D minor scale. So if I just hold a D, it is generating notes. But what we're doing here is I'm randomizing velocity all over the place, but then I'm putting in a velocity step that is a gate and limiting it between, between 20 and 40. So even though the potential velocities coming in are anything between 0 and 127, I'm only allowing through velocities between 20 and 40. And that's why even though there are notes coming through every eighth note, only a small number of them actually hit the synth. And that synth is Yuhi's Hive 2. And then we're going through a little bit of compression, probably just to like shave off some highs a bit, or some of those peaks. Yeah, it's not really doing anything, but it's there in case things get a little bit out of control. Replica then for delay, but this is a heavier delay. This is almost a 50-50, good chunk of feedback. Quarter notes, and then round for some reverb. So that is the first draft of the piece, and as I said, I think it was the first demo we did for the album, and it was sort of a conceptual pitch of look what we can do with randomized shit. Look how it's just sort of ambient and sitting in place and grooving, and that's all it needs to be. And that's what we both liked about it, was that it wasn't trying to do too much. So the next version of this track, we added a few things. So one is we took this plugin Axon 2, which uses a strange sequencing method to trigger samples, well, not samples, synthesis of drum-like sound. So by itself, it can sound like this. But that is another always-on plugin with not great sequencing options. If you want to put in the effort, you can sequence it, but we didn't. So what we did instead was we copied some of it to tape and edited it. So there's already delay and distortion and such in there, baked in, but then we added some more stuff. So let's see. First, we added Ronin, which is also audio damage. And then also audio damage is big seek 2. Hey, wouldn't you know what? We tried experimenting with 3 new to us audio damage plugins all at once, just because new toys. Then added some cluster delay on top of that. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, and then I threw in 3 different just loops for funds. So that's 3 different drum loops at, slightly left, slightly right down the middle with some mangling going on there, and it just sort of condenses down to 1 loop, and then we've got manipulator on there processing it all together. So that's version 2 of the track. Okay, here we're at version 3.1. What did we add? Well, David started adding by crickets through the whole thing, which is very cool. But it's not just crickets, it's cricket through manipulator and cluster delay, and an LFO going to the wet dry mix on the manipulator. So those are some high ass crickets. Okay, then this is where the song structure started to change, and we added some of the Butch Vig drums. So that is running through Audio Damage's Combinet DVA, which I know David really liked and put on a lot of things. And then some cluster delay on top of that. And pushing that through some OTT, the good old OTT. Let's see what is our next layer? So he could probably speak to this better, but one of the things that I think I see David doing a lot that he likes to do is take an instrument in the track, put a lot of processing on it, and leave it in there. Like, so we've got the drum beat in there with a lot of processing, but then bounce out a chunk of it and throw that on a new track and throw even more processing on it. So this sounds like it's some of that Butch Vig drum set, but with additional stutter editing and buffet editing and all that, and then he runs it through even more manipulator and delay, so it's even more unrecognizable but still rooted in that same sound source. So it's a more cohesive whole, all coming from the same few places but sounding very different. So then we have this. So again, so this was high through distortion with arpeggiation, and then a tremolo and cluster delay and reverb playing these notes. And the end result is a frozen audio file here that he then threw manipulator on, an OTT, and a randomized auto pan, and we get this. So the printed audio sounds like this. But yeah, so I mean, I love getting these files back because suddenly they'll be like, okay, here's an interesting melodic bass line that is distorted to hell and then flattened to audio and then distorted to hell even more. And here's some automation on it, making it move around a bunch. What is this last layer here? Some more hive through some more DVA. Okay, and here we are at version 3.3, which was the final version before the mixdown. And you can see here our randomized percussion that was part of the original draft has been flattened down, so it's no longer, taking up resources when, when an audio source has gone this many iterations without being changed. I feel more comfortable flattening it down to audio, so we're getting a locked performance of it. Prior to that, I want to keep things fluid so they can be changed as needed. But once it's lasted this long, it's like, okay, it's perfect as it is. Let's lock it down. That saves on CPU, but the trade-off is disk space, and I'm old school. I remember when 500 megabytes was a huge disk drive, and so the idea of like dropping that amount of space on a single audio take is something I like to avoid if I can help it. Butch Vig drums, static loop, yep. Fluctuations, got it. Synth sparks, okay. So the last thing added here, and this is clearly a David edition, is another synth. So that's the Mini V3 from Arturia. A sort of a classic Mini Moog emulation. Going through some OTT first, little EQ carving, then a good chunk of delay. Again, it's very high mix. Dotted quarter, that's a quite a bit of a delay, and then it's hitting another delay with again a very high mix, and then some reverb here, realm. But we've got cutoff and attack curves on both of these. So this looks to be sort of the final version of the track pretty much. So the things I like about this track, I mean, all the sound design I think is awesome. Um, all of the sort of melodic and harmonic elements in it are very randomized, yet it sounds really cool. And the only sort of harmonic structure that is provided is at certain moments the bass line does hit some other notes to sort of, move tension from place to place, but the rest is randomized and yet it still kind of works and creates this emotional dynamic to it. Whole lot of chaos going on, but it all sort of clicks and makes sense. And that's sort of where the name formations came from, was sort of these like a lot of noise and mess and random and everything is going in, but then shapes sort of start to form within that space. Yeah. And again, like I like that a lot of the core elements from the very first draft stayed. And at the time we were like, okay, this is good as it is. We don't need to mess with it more. It should just retain these elements and that's good enough. Um, but all the extra we added to it, I think, did give it additional places to go, and it made it a more vibrant version of itself. Like we, again, to sort of utilize the metaphor of, formations growing out of something. We started with just a pool of active uh, sound, and then these structures, these formations grew out of it that really made it something more tangible and solid on its own. Anyway, that's the breakdown of this song, and we'll get back some other time to some other thing. All right, later.